I'm so glad. I'm glad that we've got that declaration. I'm glad that Tynwald has now fully engaged. I'm glad we had full debates and that I think, got a motion at the end that really captures that people do commit to this and that they do want to see ambitious target options for the Isle of Man to do its bit to achieve net zero.
When this was decided that this transformation team was going to be created and formed, I mean, again, it's happened quite quickly. When were you approached?
Well, I was on board with the concept of this. I sat actually as a member of the advisory panel on the Sir Jonathan Michael Health and Social Care Review, representing the Legislative Council. So I think the model is excellent. I think it works really well. So I was fully on board with the concept, also applying particularly where you have a need to do something that cuts across the entire public service and beyond if we're going to be serious and drive a good response to the climate change emergency. So I was approached, I think it was not last week, but probably a week or so after the Tynwald debate, as I recall.
And you were actually involved in the interviewing process for the person to head this up?
Yes.
Okay. And what was decided as the brief? And I appreciate we're still in the initial phases of this, but could you give us a rough overview of really the remit of this transformation team?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the output is very much in line with the Tynwald motion, which is that we want an action plan that should set out some ambitious target options, but also it should have some interim targets and an assessment of the impact of those different options. And also the output of this team needs to inform what goes into the climate change bill that's due to come forth in the next legislative year. So what we're tasked with doing is to respond to that Tynwald motion. Then in terms of who you get to lead this team, I mean, I think everyone's clear. The independence is significant. The expertise is significant as well. And I don't just mean expertise in terms of climate knowledge, and certainly Professor Curran has that in shed loads, but also expertise of the practicality of trying to deliver change to address the climate change emergency. And again, he scores very highly on that practical aspect of sitting in different capacities and trying to deliver meaningful change.
So was this very much a headhunting exercise on the interview process? Or
I think we obviously were in a very, very tight timescale as well. So the relevant officers could draw together a shortlist of people who potentially had the skills, and then they were rated against all the relevant expertise criteria. And actually, Professor Curran came out strongly against all of that criteria. So did another candidate. I won't name them, but then it's a question of availability as well. So I think we've actually really done well in the short time available, and I'm personally hugely optimistic that we've secured ourselves a really good leader for this team.
So yeah, I mean, former chief executive of SEPA, the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency, really distinguished professor. What have been your sort of initial discussions like, and what's your take on him?
Hugely refreshing, engaging man with, as you say, great credentials in terms of his own scientific career and background, but also the various roles that he's held. What I find particularly is that, he talks about the importance of doing things that are evidenced. He talks about having a good approach, and I mean by that a sort of planned approach, a programme managed approach, so that as you draw together your action plan, you're aware of all the interdependencies, you're aware of what works at the moment so you can come forward with policies, but you're also aware of the fact that this is a fast-moving area, technology changing all the time, so you can also come up with proposals. But then you must keep the whole thing under review, because as different technology comes online, perhaps as sources of new funding become available, things will change in terms of how we can respond and what we can do to address the climate emergency.
Is there any concerns? Because, of course, he's involved in a very similar team in the region of Glasgow, Strathclyde. Is there any concerns that there's going to be, not necessarily conflicts, but in terms of spreading himself thin?
No, I mean, I think we've been very clear, as I think is right, that this is on a tight timescale and we want to deliver the action plan in time with Tynwald's schedule. And he says it is a challenge, but it's a challenge he will step up to. And I think the important point, though, as I said, is in coming with an action plan for Tynwald in January 2020, you're not going to be saying, here it is for the next 15, 20, 30 years. What you're going to be saying is, here it is now, and this is what we need to be getting on with. But actually, this needs to be kept now under tight monitor, review and update. It has to be a really active, ongoing process.
I mean, some people have sort of argued, perhaps quite cynically, that the formation of this team is an outsourcing of leadership, perhaps that was not necessarily there to begin with. Is that what this government then requires, perhaps, to get to grips with this issue?
I think this particular issue is one that challenges everybody because it's so fast moving. And I think actually the other thing that I think is personally hugely valuable is we're getting a pair of fresh eyes. I think all of us in whatever we do day to day, you can get very, very close to what you know, and you don't always look at things from a fresh perspective. And the other thing I found massively refreshing and engaging about Professor Curran is he comes along and his first impression is, wow, Isle of Man, look at your natural resources, look at your opportunities. You've got so many opportunities to do this really well and to make the changes, but with a lot of co-benefits and benefits for your economy, for your society. And that's amazing. So that I think is very, very powerful. And that can be difficult to generate, I think, amongst people who are perhaps very, very close to all the day-to-day detailed issues, whereas he can bring that refreshing, optimistic perspective.
Is this going to give, I suppose, are you confident that this will give you that real and meaningful change that you called for in the Tynwald debate last month?
Yes, so far I am. I'm delighted to be part of the team. I'm delighted we've got Professor Curran on board, and I think we have a real opportunity to do some great work that will make a real difference here. And I think we can do it in a way that's economically beneficial and that is socially inclusive, so that we can bring all of our communities along on the journey and they can all benefit from this significant opportunity.
Obviously, it's mobilised a significant number of people in terms of taking to the street. We've seen student protests, we've seen Tynwald Day protests. It's really captured the imagination of people who are equally concerned in this. How do you go about harnessing that engagement and utilising it, perhaps? Have you had discussions?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's extremely early, but James Curran was in the island at the beginning of this week for a couple of days, and one of the things that we talked about is how we engage with people, so that is definitely a stream of work. I mean, again, on an extremely tight timescale. You want to engage as much as possible but still be able to deliver the outputs of the action plan. So that is definitely part of it, is to try and make sure that Professor Curran brings his knowledge and expertise but listens and understands the Isle of Man and hears people's perspectives and can reflect on that as well.
Again, we're talking about the early phases, the early stages of this. You mentioned that it cannot be about the pain and the wringing of hands and the problems, and we know that this is not going to be easy. First and foremost, what are these challenges that you're going to have to face in terms of delivering this action plan?
Well, I think,
convincing people.
Yes, one of the things that we came up in the Tynwald debates was the realities for all of us in our everyday lives, and it's true. I mean, I think talking to friends and people around the island, people are thinking about the changes they need to make. And some of them are easier, whether it's using a reusable bottle rather than, always buying plastic, or maybe turning the electricity off. And some of them perhaps are more difficult. So, one of the things I'm thinking of is I'd like to get an electric car. And then you think, well, I want to research that, the financing of it. So, there are a whole range of things that we as individuals may be challenged in or may need to think about in the way we live our own personal lives. I will freely admit I drive my car and I think I drive it too much. I try and walk my children to school. Could I do it more? Could I get the bus more? Could I get myself an electric bike and cycle in some days? And the answer to all of those questions is yes. It's a challenge for me, though, because I'll just have to adapt the way I do things. I'll have to work a bit harder to do those things. So, but my view on it is, let's focus on the opportunity and the possibilities and how we can enable them, rather than think we're going to ask people to make a lot of change that they won't want to make. I think once we can talk about what the options are, how people can access those options, how they can be enabled to do the things that I think most people probably do want to do. I think people do probably want to take an approach which is, let's safeguard our scarce resources, let's live more sustainably, let's actually save some money for ourselves. So friends who have moved to electric cars will tell you about how, they've gone from spending £100 every so often on petrol or diesel to an electricity bill that's much, much lower. So, let's think about what the benefits are, and let's think about how we inform people and enable people to harness those benefits.
On a professional level, how being involved in this team, how's that going to affect how you do your day-to-day work as an MLC? Have you had to make compromises to retain this role?
Do you mean in terms of overall workload?
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Yeah, I am really busy, so I did think about taking this on, but my view on it in the end was, this is so significant, it is so far-reaching and so important for the Isle of Man, and it's something that I care about, that I thought I will make the time. I've said before, it's a real privilege to be able to serve in Tynwald on the Legislative Council. And if you get an opportunity to do something and contribute in any way you can, then, personally, I want to take the opportunity.